So, now for a big event this morning, the 2019 Public Art Network Year in Review. Yeah, exactly. The Americans for the Arts Public Art Network, A Year in Review, is the annually recognizes outstanding public art projects that represent the most compelling work for the year from across the country and beyond. Each year, 2 or more public art professionals serve as jurors to review hundreds of project applications and select up to 50 projects to highlight the most compelling public artworks. Applications are accepted for projects that are completed in the previous calendar year. The Pan Year in Review is the only national program that specifically recognizes public art projects and is an excellent advocacy and educational tool for public art administrators, artists, and allied professionals as they engage with their community, professional stakeholders and others, community stakeholders and others within their area. This year, we had the largest application pool in over 5 years with 361 submittals, which represented projects that were completed and accessible to the public in 2018. Our jurors, who we'll hear from in a moment, will read through all the applications and selected 50 projects to highlight this year. New this year, however, Americans for the Arts, in collaboration with the Public Art Network Council, added some additional optional questions to the applications to better understand the distribution of project budgets, among other things. AFTR's research staff has been sorting through the data submitted through the applications, and though we aim to have a fuller report earlier this year, I wanted to highlight a few pieces of information we've already learned. Pie charts. Our first slide here, you see a percentage breakdown of the budget expenditures that were reported by about a third of the applicants. Though not an in-depth field review of public art budget breakdown, this pie provides a snapshot to an age-old question: where does the money for the public art projects go? And though all of you know this for your own work, this information provides a national view of the breakdown of public art project budgets by categories. You'll see the largest category with a bit of over 50% is for artists. This includes costs that pay for artist labor, design, fabrication of the artwork and project. Artist costs may also include insurance, engineering, design fees, material, testing, prototyping, revisions of design, fabrication, installation, permit fees, travel, hotel, parking, transportation, shipping, and of course, artist labor and time. So it's kind of a large bucket, and I think that's probably what helped drive such a large response to this particular category. The second largest, with about 35%, is what we call project expenditures. These are dollars associated with the design and implementation of the project. These costs may include outreach and communication, artist selection process, generating maquettes for semifinalists, signage, public relations, marketing, advertising, programming connected to artwork, such as lectures and panels, site preparation, and de-installation fees, particularly for temporary projects. And then our next project budget, going smaller, but for about 8.5%, is what we sort of gave as a larger expenditure of administrative costs. So these are dollars used to cover the general overhead and staffing costs of projects. They may include salaries, benefits, consultant fees, project management, and general overhead. From there, it goes down to this lovely word that we all like to use, is contingency. So those monies that are typically set aside for cover unforeseen costs. So this is about 2.5% of the breakdown of budgets. Such costs may include side issues and additional design fees if necessary due to project changes. The next sort of smaller category is 1.4% of that lovely survey category that we all call other. We're still kind of looking into that one to figure out what we missed in the other categories. And then the smallest one, which we weren't really too surprised about, but we're glad is being at least highlighted in some capacity, is about 1.1% is for future maintenance of projects. So this is costs and fees that will help basically continue the project in some capacity. And so so that tells us a little bit about the budget breakdown, but what about the budgets themselves? In looking at the 2019 public art project, looking at all the 2019 Pan Year in Review project applications overall, we saw a wide range of budgets, from the smallest at a modest $100 and to the largest of over $23 million. With the total amount invested based on those projects alone, those 361 projects that were submitted for this, $119,135,399. We also found that the median dollar amount was about $100,000, and the average for all the projects was $377,000, give or take. So what does all this mean for the field? Well, we're still sorting that out. There's still more data that we need to dig through, from geographic spread to number of artists per project, type of materials used, and a whole lot more. I look forward to sharing the final results of this work in early fall. So, moving on to our main event. This year, I'm actually going to invite the jurors to come up, and then I'll give you guys an introduction as you get your sides settled. This year, our jurors are Aaron Ott, Curator of Public Art of the Albright Knox Gallery in Buffalo, New York, and Seitu Jones, local St. Paul, Minnesota artist. And I would be remiss, of course, if I didn't mention Christina Park, Senior Coordinator for the Initiative for Creative Placemaking and Cultural Community and Equitable Communities at Arizona State University, who was a co-juror at the beginning of the process that had to step away when a new addition was added to her family. So congratulations to Christina and her family, and thank you for your time this year. A little bit about Aaron and Seitu, who you'll be hearing from in a few moments. Aaron joined the Albright Knox Art Gallery in April of 2014 as the museum's inaugural Curator of Public Art. He spearheads the Albright Knox Public Art Initiative, an innovative partnership between the Albright Knox, Erie County, and the City of Buffalo, established in 2014. The goal of the initiative is to create spaces of dialogue where diverse communities have the ability to engage with, respond to, and cooperatively produce great public art, establishing Western New York as a critical cultural center. Aaron's curatorial philosophy is grounded in the notion that the shared landscape of our lives is abundant with the opportunity to create, experience, and talk about notions of beauty, culture, originality, and innovation. He is committed to art that is generous to spirit, conceptually affirmative, and participatory in format. Seitu is a St. Paul visual artist. Working on his own in collaboration with other artists or communities, Seitu has created over 30 large-scale public artworks. He was a Millennium Artist in Residence for 651 Arts in Brooklyn, New York, was the first artist in residency for the city of Minneapolis, and created artwork for 3 stations for the new Green Line light rail transit systems for the Twin Cities. In 2013, he was awarded a Joyce Award from Chicago's Joyce Foundation, which allowed him to develop Create, the community meal, a dinner for over 2,000 people at a table half-mile long that focused on access to healthy food. This was also a pan-year in review project. I'm just going to point that out. In addition, he worked with members of his community to create a 5-acre farm in a new city park in Frogtown, St. Paul. For about 18 months, Seitu was also the Senior Fellow in Agricultural Systems in the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Science Resources. He's been awarded a Minnesota State Arts Board Fellowship, a McKnight Visual Artist Fellowship, a Bush Artist Fellowship, a Bush Leadership Fellowship, a National Endowment for the Arts Theater Communication Group Designer Fellowship, and a Loeb Fellowship at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Whew. He's busy. So I'm going to step away now. I'm going to hand you guys the all-important clicker, which will get you through the rest of your slides. And take it away, you two.
Well, thank you for coming, and once again, welcome to my hometown. Welcome to Minneapolis and St. Paul here. It's an honor and very flattering to be asked to review these 361 projects and to ask for your patience as we go through this. This is the first time that I've ever done this with Americans in the Arts. And I had no idea that you all would be willing to sit through 300 slides. I'm warning you now, so you can get up and run now if you need to. But we're going to go through these 50 projects that we've highlighted, and then and talk a little bit about some of the issues and trends that we see as we describe these projects.
Yeah, and Seitu, your voice sounds good. I am definitively under the weather, so I'll try and sniff and cough off mic. Hopefully, this is a one-time use mic. I would encourage you to burn it after we're done with this. Maybe make a performance out of it. I don't know. But yeah, I think there's a lot to go through, and so we're looking forward to getting started. Maybe we can preface that with some of the themes that you'll see are not they're not necessarily untraditional themes, but they're not necessarily academic themes either. Seitu and I talked a lot about the way in which these projects made us feel, and what the kind of discussions that they led us on. And among the themes that we kind of settled on was this disruptive notion that public art provides in your landscape, this sort of positive disruption in a way in which we encourage the public to stop and contemplate and think about what is directly in front of them. And one way that is done is through spectacle, which is kind of a bit of a dirty word in academia sometimes, but which I feel like is a useful term in the work that we do, and one that when you're talking to the general public, they understand. If you say this is going to cause a spectacle, oftentimes they're excited about it.
And so what we've done here for each one of the categories that we're using here is use both literal descriptions, but primarily metaphorical descriptions. And as Aaron said, something that we all can embrace and all understand in some way. Before we begin, too, as I know that I'm addressing primarily art administrators, how many artists are in the room?
Yay.
All right. All right. Big shout out to all you artists that are here. And that brings up my biases as well. I need to put that out front. I do, as you heard in the description, if you know my work, a big component of my work is social engagement or community engagement in some way. In addition, I always kind of waited for selecting these 50 projects. I heavily weighted them on artist participation and artist-led projects. So you'll see that here in the work as well.
Yeah, and the first piece that we're going to talk about today is already up on the screen. And this is a work that, I don't have the luxury of seeing all of these works in person. I try and get around to as many of the projects as I can. But this is one that kind of came across my radar in advance of our jurying this through Instagram. And I think that there's a lot of, administrators and artists that might kind of wrinkle their nose at, making art for Instagram. I think if we're making art for Instagram, that's maybe not the best. But I do really believe in the power of those kind of social media platforms and the way in which we share and engage this work for a public that can't get physically to the site, but that can still kind of celebrate the ways in which it changes the landscape that we share. And actually, one of the slides will kind of highlight the Instagrammability of this particular piece. And I do think, it's the kind of work that makes me want to go to Austin. It's the kind of work that I want to see in person. It's the kind of work that I know when I'm there, I will probably take a photo of. And so I get really encouraged when I see kind of bold urban statements like this.
As a trend as well, too, what this does is end up creating another site.
Another mural engagement. This one is by a group of artists. And Seitu and I talked a lot about what it meant to have, a singular work of art selected and celebrated versus those kind of works that were either festival-based or based around a number of artists that are sort of altering the shared landscape together. And in this instance, I think one of the things that encouraged me about this project was the location. I mean, these are a lot of incredible artists, but the fact that Gainesville, Florida, which is a place that I've never been to, is willing to kind of embrace this and chase these kind of artists and get them to change their landscape, I think is super encouraging. I've been able to see how murals can kind of transform the landscape in a small town like Buffalo, and I'm encouraged that other small cities are embracing that as well. We'll name the title and the artist. Some of these projects have multiple artists, and their names are on the screen, so hopefully we'll be able to not read you to death. But this project by Joshua Mays is a Philadelphia-based project. Certainly, the Philly Mural Arts Program has been a leadership there for quite some time, and has created an environment where murals are really celebrated and sort of seen as a common form. In this particular installation, I'm always encouraged by projects that include students and youth as part of the project. There was also an augmented reality element to this project that I thought was kind of a unique way to get people engaged and participating in an otherwise sort of passive public work.
And also in terms of creating this other site, this was a collaboration between an artist and a DJ, and they ended up creating this soundscape that ends up being a part of this augmented reality. So you end up using your device, your electronic device, to look at this piece and have this other experience.
So this is a sculptural intervention called Passageways 2.0 that was done in Chattanooga. And again, I sort of appreciate that that people are sort of recognizing these liminal spaces, whether they're an alleyway or an urban space that may be underutilized or even blighted, that they can sort of interrupt them, disrupt them, and encourage people to use them differently. And, in this particular case, the work really encouraged a lot of people to come and sit, and there were a set of performances that were accompanied by the installation. So I like the way that the project kind of breathes, where sometimes the piece itself, may have only a couple people kind of walking through, and in other cases, or even in the night, the work is kind of celebrated by multiple publics.
This is the air traffic control at Nashville International Airport. And here, it's a lot of play on light. This is something that really needs to be viewed at night to have this full range of rich experiences. In the corner of each floor of the building are these light columns.
Well, and as I traveled to the Minneapolis-St. Paul region, I was jet-lagged and ill and kind of not paying attention to my surroundings as I might otherwise. But again, I kind of feel like if I were flying in and out of Nashville, this would be something that would be very visible and that I would be really happy to have encountered.
Reflection Rising in Scottsdale, Arizona, is this temporary piece that happened along the canal, using these streamers, using these multicolored streamers, created this kind of rich, moving piece that went back and forth over the water for several blocks.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think about as a curator and as an administrator as I'm kind of developing projects, I'm looking for those kind of things that will get people to pay attention to their landscape in a different way, maybe spur dialogue that they wouldn't have had otherwise, get them to value the landscape that they might sort of mindlessly pass. And I also think about, the diversity of audiences, and in particular, because I have an 8-year-old son, I think a lot about young audiences, and I just, when this piece kind of came up, I thought about how delighted I would have been to kind of walk along the waterway with my son and discuss the value of water and take these pictures of this sort of newly aestheticized space.
Red Can Graffiti Jam in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. Here again, this small town. We should also say, too, that we really tried to look at the geographic location and really tried to make sure that we had this geographic spread as we selected these 50 pieces to be highlighted. And this was one that was really compelling to me in how this work can really transform this small town that has this large indigenous population as well, that's a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that Eagle Butte is going after public art. I think that it's encouraging to see that it's not just major metropolitan areas, it's not some of these massive budgets that we've seen that I would love to have, but that communities are coming together to saying like, our voices are valuable, and I think the public realm gives power to that. Voices don't often have that kind of a platform. And so when you have that kind of stage and that kind of space to speak together about what you sort of the common values of a space, I think it's really encouraging.
Hard in the bait, hard in the paint. I mean, this is perfectly appropriate after watching Toronto win last night, and rethinking the way a basketball court, a regulation basketball court, could have an artist to make this kind of integration into the work.
Well, I love the way that this alters space. In fact, and when Seitu and I were talking about this piece, I think I'm recalling correctly that when Seitu saw this, he was like, "Oh man, I wish I'd done that." Like I think it's cool when you see work where you're just like, "Oh, they got there first."
Exactly.
But I do really love this piece, and it's been a piece that I've since we voted on it here. I've shown it to a lot of constituents in Buffalo as the Albright's undergoing kind of a shift during a construction period. We're leaning more heavily on public arts activities, and we're also trying to figure out how we can take our advertising dollars and instead of spending them on Instagram and Facebook, how we can spend them on communities. And so we talked to people about sponsoring local basketball teams, and one of the conversations that came up was, well, we've got these two blocks that play each other, but they play in the street because their basketball court's garbage. And I was like, oh, well, we can help with that too.
There you go. A great artist or artistic intervention, and that actually, now that Aaron outed me a little, I'm going to completely out myself. Generally, as I've matured, the older I've become, the less frequently that I commit myself to sitting on jurors or selection panels, because it's harder and harder for me to say no. I want everyone to experience this, or everyone to have this opportunity and share that opportunity. But the primary reason I said yes to this is so that I could get a better understanding of what's happening in the field at this time. And so I could steal all you all's ideas.
Don't worry, they're going to steal from us too. So this next, as we talked about, spectacle being a useful form of kind of thematically dividing up the works that we selected. One of the ways in which that's done is through architectural intervention, whether it takes the form of actual architecture or kind of replicates that form, or whether it's taking existing architecture and sort of modifying it or amplifying it. That became a way that we could start talking about these works. So this work, The Venerable Outpost, was a really compelling piece for me. I just felt like what it did and how well it was crafted. This would I feel like be a site that I would really revisit.
Oh, yeah.
And that encouragement to kind of come back to place over and over again. And again, it's in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I think it's great to see work happening in a space like that. I think this budget of $180,000, from what I'm looking at, they pulled off a miracle.
No joke.
I mean, there's a lot going on here, just from the sheer construction and artist fees that I imagine would be involved, that seems like a modest budget to have pulled off such an incredible piece.
I mean, in addition, the thing that I'd really want to draw folks' attention to are the way that the artist integrated the stained glass elements in this structure. I mean, between the log spaces as windows, and in the roof as well too. So the experience of going in here would really, hopefully enlighten your day.
Yeah. With this next piece, and I'll go ahead and out myself on this one. You know, these kind of building wraps are something that I usually wrinkle my nose at and kind of despise, but I feel, because you know, a lot of people will come to you and be like, well, why don't we just throw a wrap on it? And it's not that easy, as this budget shows, and it's not that easy aesthetically. And I think what struck me with this piece, and I didn't review before this morning again, so I kind of forgot a little bit about. I don't know whether the artists, you know, used a ton of feedback from the community or from the group, but what I do appreciate is that the work kind of stands on its own. I'm sure a lot of administrators in this room are familiar with, you know, whatever city or municipality they work in, that everybody wants a thing that is about their thing. So everybody, for example, asks me for buffaloes. Everybody wants a buffalo mural. Everybody wants a buffalo sculpture. Everybody wants the next buffalo thing. And so I appreciate when artists are sort of given tasks and allowed the space to breathe and do what they do aesthetically. And I think that this was just a really successful version of that.
You know, also, the artists, this did have a strong community engagement component that was a part of it. And so the artists, working with young folks, was telling the story about their community. And if there's a trend that we see more and more this year, and in my own work and in my own travels, it's one of gentrification and displacement. And I even have a hard time using those terms, because I think as artists we need to come up with something that's even more appropriate. And I'll talk maybe a little bit about that later. But here, this piece is about folks talking about home.
That's good. So the Seashore Cathedral here, in Buffalo we have an elevated highway called the Skyway that's kind of reviled by many, and I had engaged the New York State Transportation Authority along with a number of stakeholders, the Empire State Development, Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation, to paint the underside of our Skyway. So looking at this, I know the challenges that this artist faced, which are many. And I look at that budget of $18,000, and I think they gave him a pile of straw, and he gave them a pile of gold. So you know, I'm kind of, these spaces are not easy to make transformative. They are not easy to make welcoming, and I think that this is an example of how, you know, we get asked, you know, to kind of change these blighted, tough spaces, and this artist, I think, did a lot with a little.
And you know, there are so many projects that you really have to see to experience. And in slides, we're presenting just literally a snapshot, something that's frozen in time. This piece, really, you need to go to the accompanying video for this, to see the movement in this, to see how this piece is brought to life.
Yeah, we didn't include video in this presentation just for the convenience of time,
right?
Because we have so many slides. But you know, this work again takes, you know, a building in downtown Akron that was, you know, either underutilized or vacant, and kind of tries to, you know, revitalize those spaces, get people to look at them again and say, hey, there's value here. And you know, I really appreciate that. You know, growing up in Ohio, I know towns like this, and I know the effect that these kind of things can have on those small communities. So I really appreciate the work that's done.
You know, and here again, this is just one of many projects that was developed and sponsored by Curated Storefront, an independent agency in Akron.
So this Wonderwall, this is a huge architectural element that was sort of clad onto an existing structure in Charlotte, North Carolina by Mark Forens. And you know, it's an astonishing work. You know, it's the scale of it is monumental, and the way that it transforms an entire skyline is really thrilling to me. And seeing the work that Mark has done and the way that it's evolved from, you know, sculptures that were pretty humble in his early career to work like this is pretty impressive. Yeah, I mean, there you kind of see the way that it integrates into the nighttime landscape. I think it's phenomenal.
And where the river flows, this piece is a two-part piece. So it has this thing that you experience when you walk in that's above you. But the real tour de force to me is the floor. And this great terrazzo mix. This would be a great welcome whenever you walked into this building.
Yeah, there are a couple floor pieces that we selected for this year's awards, and I do think that it's something that gets overlooked. You know, I think a lot of times we're thinking about wall spaces, or we're thinking about kind of open spaces, but floor spaces can really kind of make an experience all the richer. And the way in which I think this kind of two-part piece took that into effect was really fascinating, whimsical, fun. I think that, you know, this was done with impeccable craft. And so I'm encouraged to see spaces like this, because I do think as developers are thinking about ways in which they can make sort of simple interventions into their spaces, they ought to be thinking about floors like this. So this town enclosure pavilion in Jackson, Wyoming, was something that I was really drawn to. I love the sort of simplicity of this work. It's obviously a rigid sort of sculptural form, but that allows for all kinds of flexibility in terms of the way that it's used as a gathering space, as a performance space that you see here, as a sort of aesthetic space. I feel like it's so compelling to me to see a small space like this be so transformative, and I love the simplicity of the gesture and the flexibility of the work.
This is one of these pieces that as you walk by it, as you walk around it, it appears, reappears, disappears. There are some folks from Jackson here, aren't there? Yeah. Big shout out to you all from Jacksonville.
Absolutely. This is a great piece.
Now, this was another piece, A Tree Inside Me, at school in Bronx, New York. And this would be something that would be informative and inspiring to any young person that walked in here. And it was also something that allowed them to make a mark. This piece is this large mosaic that is abstracted, but also was a tool for engagement for these young people in this school.
Yeah, I love the way that it incorporated young audiences as participants and as in the project. I can't recall whether this space had the space allocated ahead of time, but it was this really kind of clinically white wall that really needed something, and so I appreciate photographs like this that incorporate youth audiences, which can be super challenging. Those of us who've dealt with school groups and youth audiences, Seitu is up here as a professional artist who has a career behind him. Professional artists go to many years for education and learning, and they hone their skills in the real world, and children are still learning those processes, and I think we can't expect them to be the greatest of fine artists. Although in a space like this, I think it's great where that can kind of be led by an artist, and where the outcome is elevated to that artist's level, and we'll see several projects like this a bit later.
Here again, another project that includes many artists, another initiative that includes many artists. The New York Transit System, excuse me, Big shout out to MTA there's some folks here from the MTA as well too here for integrating this work into the reconstruction of this big public works project.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of work that in big urban spaces where there are a lot of people coming and going, I mean, we know the kind of headaches that these kind of projects can be, from, you know, board meetings and community meetings and engineering and safety concerns and aesthetic concerns. And there's so much wrapped up in a project of this scale that from an administrative standpoint, it's impressive. And then when, you know, you see it in person, I mean, these become beacons, these become kind of havens in your life that you that become part of integrated into your daily experience in a way that I think can be really meaningful in an otherwise kind of tough space.
These icons that end up becoming these landmarks for folks.
Yeah. The next sort of, I mean, theme is aesthetics. You know, I mean, sculpture can sort of, I mean, there is a place for art's sake in our public spaces, and I think that we should celebrate that. And so with this next group, and again, it's a group of artists that work together through open spaces in Kansas City to produce a number of works. And I really love what's going on here because it encourages you to move around your civic space in a different way, visit places that you might not have felt welcome. It can create communities where there weren't any, and it can really shift your perspective on the value of these shared spaces. And so I find projects like this really encouraging from a civic perspective of how we can really get people moving around in a new way.
And this is just a handful of the 40 artists that participated in this. The image that you just saw there earlier is a video installation by Nick Cave inside an old church that uses all the walls there of the space and the floors as well too.
I can talk a little bit about this one. So this Blackbird piece, I was so smitten by this sculpture. I just could not look away from it. I kept going back to it, and I was so charmed by it. And I just thought, like, this is the kind of work that I would love to produce and love to put out there, because I know that wherever, you know, it would land, it would sort of have. I would visit it. Like if it were in a park near me, I'd be there all the time. I just find it, I don't know, it just makes me smile, and I know that that's kind of that's hard to quantify. But when Seitu and I were talking about the selection process, I kind of was really vocal about this work because I just was like, this thing is so great. I would love to, you know, grow old with this thing. I would love to bring my kids and have my kids come back and see it when they're older. I don't know. It's just like, I was just like, it's so damn cute. Oh, I love it.
In addition to that, I mean, one of the things that he's also revealing and outing is our process. Is that, you know, we ended up like having our own kind of grading system. And there were some that he rated high, some that I rated high, and some that even had Christina's ratings in them before she had her child. And so we ended up having this thing where we convinced each other back and forth. Now, this was an easy one to convince me, you know, initially when I looked at it. And later on, you're going to see one of our categories that focuses on storytelling. So in addition to being this wonderful little bird here, this tells a story. It tells a story of the Mexican-American community in Austin and around this park, how these folks were displaced in the 20s. And so there's no real sign of that community there in Austin anymore. And this bird does that in this motif and its designs.
God, I love that. I love when something whimsical can still have depth like that. I think that there's this misnomer that if it is, you know, kind of aesthetic, that it doesn't have content. But I love that the sort of hook of this piece for me was the sort of sheer joy of seeing it, and then you get into the content. I think it's really compelling. So cute.
One of the things that we looked at as well, I kept asking,
So good.
what is that thing on the back? Is that a drinking fountain? But exploring a little bit deeper, that's an actual seat.
Chair. This work called The Hug, again, I think that it's a really simple gesture. Even the form is not necessarily groundbreaking, right? But I think that it's really well done. This artist picked up 2 leaves at the site and started curling them around in his hands to kind of help develop what the form might look like, so that the site specificity is literally right where the sculpture was placed. And it's really, really well crafted. It's something that'll last. I mean, these seem like silly things to highlight, but I don't know about you, but I get asked all the time to produce work like this, and this budget seems really reasonable to me for the material and the size and the scope and the scale. And so, but people want these giant kind of beacons, these markers, and these things that make change in their shared landscape, and they have no idea what it takes to produce. And so I don't know, I was just really compelled by how smart this work felt upon further investigation.
And it really extends the work that he has been doing for a while, blending art and nature, reducing these leaves to their architectural skeleton.
So this next set of works deal with what we deemed meditation or meditative qualities in public space. Again, it's another kind of, you know it when you see it, if a piece encourages you to slow down and take a look. And this is just another impeccable floor piece done by Julie Chang. I really dove into this artist's production a lot more after kind of discovering her through this process, and just this thing is amazing. I would love to be in a place like this that has this as a kind of commitment to culture, and another what could have just been tile.
And working with many of you all, working in municipalities, counties, states, and the federal government, you find out how government works, and then you find out how government doesn't work. She spent 10 years in this particular process.
Yeah, it's impressive when you go see her production. I mean, she doesn't have a lot of giant floor pieces because she was so dedicated to it. But when you see this work, it fits directly into her practice, and it is very much a signature. And I hope that a lot of people pay attention to the capacity for an artist who's not traditionally a public artist to translate their work for a public space at a scale like this. It's incredible. And when we're talking about scale, I mean, Jose Parla's work here as part of the Landmarks installation at UT Austin is really an astonishing work. I first became aware of Jose's work as he's in the collection at the Albright, and kind of fell in love with it. And again, knew him more as a studio painter, and then as I discovered more about his practice, which he's produced a lot of public work, I've become really compelled by the way that his work speaks to people and kind of shifts your awareness. And I don't know, I get really moved by work like this, especially at UT Austin. I feel like this is something that will be generational for people to visit over time.
And here again, too, the artist is telling the story. What he's referring to is the Amistad, a ship that was carrying Africans who had been enslaved, where they took over the ship. Actually, it's been the subject of many other artists. African-American artists have created murals about the Amistad story, where slaves took over the ship, sailed the ship, and ended up being captured and brought into America, where there's this long trial about their freedom. And what he's really commenting on here is the relationship between African Americans and the Latino community.
Yeah, and I love, again, the scale of the piece is overwhelming. It gives you the space to kind of sit with that heavy content. It's really wonderful.
You know, before we leave that as well, too, one of the things I wanted to point out is that while we need to make sure that this becomes something that we work on, especially when we look at the equitable selection of artists for public art commissions, is the updated version of this that Patricia referred to, is that it's welcoming to see more and more artists of color receive large-scale commissions, like Jose did here.
Absolutely. So continuing the meditation theme, this next piece by Anne Lilly at the Boston Greenway is a piece that I saw. So we can go forward one more slide. And this is a work again by an artist who does make kind of interactive pieces, does occasionally make mechanized pieces, but as I understand it, this was her first major kind of outdoor piece, and that comes with all kinds of challenges. And I think she solved them well. I know that they had to solve a lot of it on the fly, but the way that this work kind of functions is this kind of canopy that has glass that moves and sort of reveals and obscures the sky, and reveals and obscures you and your partners as you kind of recline on these benches in this green space, and tucked on the greenway, where on either side of you is traffic, but to kind of create an environment where that slows, where you get to contemplate the earth above you and the way you're grounded on it, I think is really moving, and I think the artist pulled off a miraculous piece.
Here again, for $150,000, this is, one of the things that Patricia didn't include in her big circle diagram, her big pie chart, was magic. The kind of magic that artists have to use over and over and over again to create a piece like this.
So this is a different kind of magic, and this was the $23 million budget that you saw as the top piece, but I think there's a reason here, and this is work by Kelly, and it's astonishing. Again, as in terms of a meditative space, it's pretty unparalleled, and again, this thing will outlive all of us, and I think that's kind of an amazing thing to contemplate the challenges that we face in public art. The fact that maintenance was like, what, 1.1% of those budgets is way, way, way too small, because it's unsexy. Nobody likes to continue to get money to maintain these things. But an object like this, in a place like this, has that built in. And I just think that what the Blanton's done with this installation is produce one of the more moving places that I've been able to witness. This was another piece that I was vocal about. Benjamin Volta is a Philly-based artist, and I really appreciate the way, again, that Ben works with young audiences, the way he incorporates their feedback and their production, and then puts his own fingerprint on it. This is at the Free Library, Philadelphia. And again, if you take this very light touch off this wall, this space becomes kind of just chilly and cold and clinical. But with the work that Ben did to kind of really gently change that space through his interventions and through his production, I thought was really compelling. I know him more from his mural production in outdoor spaces, so I was really thrilled to see kind of an interior space get altered that really still felt like a Ben Volta piece.
I mean, these translucent pieces, these translucent images, reflecting back on the name, are supposed to also guide you to be diligent in your dreams and your hopes. So this is a piece that also inspires and informs.
Yeah, as Seitu mentioned, I mean, one of the things that we honed in on was the ability to tell and share stories, right? Narratives that may go unshared or that are underrepresented in our culture. So this work, Night Watch, I think it made the rounds for good reason. I mean, this is a really incredible work that is ostensibly a video work that focused on immigrant and refugee and vulnerable populations in New York City, and gave them visibility in a way that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And I think this kind of intervention really gets people to take notice and look and listen to those stories in ways that they may have otherwise looked away from.
To take these folks who many times are invisible in our societies and our cities, and silently have these images be something that face you.
Yeah. The confrontation of this piece was significant, but I really love what Shimon was able to produce with it, and I think it was a piece that a lot of people revisited, even treated like a pilgrimage during its installation.
In this piece here in San Antonio, is another great effort in telling a story about the surrounding community along this canal.
Well, and I love, Adriana Garcia, the artist for this piece, I love the way that this is not a memorial. I think, it's a story that continues, right? She tells the history of here indigenous people meeting settlers. I was told not to use that word because the indigenous people were already settled there. So, but taking into account, these meetings and the way that has altered the space in San Antonio, but also using contemporary imagery and imagery of children in playing together in current day. I think it really it's a phenomenal sort of timeline of that place. And so I just felt like it was a really well executed visualization of both kind of honoring the history, but saying that it continues, as you see here. And I thought that was really thrilling. And again, I appreciate San Antonio engaging an artist who has a traditionally studio-based painting practice and giving her the opportunity to produce in a public space in a really meaningful way.
Here again, a group of artists commissioned to create these pieces throughout the city of Boston, the Grove Hall Mural Cities. And actually, just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Boston and was able to experience a few of these murals while I was there. And here again, we haven't used the term placemaking, another term that I sometimes have a hard time using. But here, the artwork, the murals themselves end up creating this great sense of place.
Yeah, and I appreciate the sort of Afrocentric vision of the artists and the commitment to that in these spaces. I believe one of the artists had said, if you're in Boston, the mural that you'll see of a person of color is going to be a big poppy, and there might even be more now given the tragedy that befell him. But I think he was saying, like, listen, there's a community here that doesn't get valued, that doesn't get seen in the same way that other people might. And there was actually an article about this work in particular that called the design of it, quote unquote, too powerful for certain spaces. And I thought, like, God, that's awesome. Like, I love that people are threatened by this work and in a way that they don't frankly need to be, but I appreciate that they're being given, these artists were given the space and the time to talk about the necessity of sharing these kind of spaces.
I mean, in terms of this power, I was able to witness that power for this particular piece in that I was visiting an incubator kitchen across the street with a group of people, and everyone stopped and had to stand in front of this piece before we even were able to get into the kitchen.
Yeah, it means a lot. I mean, I talk a lot about our experience in Buffalo, which is a city that's north of 45% African American. It's a half black city, but still a segregated city, and what it means to not just see artwork like this, but to see artists making work. I mean, we forget the value of a lot of the commission work that we place, especially mural work, mosaic work, work that requires on-site production. It's really valuable, again, for young audiences to see artists that look like them producing work that looks like them. So this Pathways to Freedom piece, this image actually was something that really caught my attention. I mean, immediately I was like, oh my God, what are they doing? I just wanted to know what was happening because I was so thrilled by the sort of temporary alteration to this monument. I thought I was like, whatever this intervention is, somebody had to be convinced, and that was work.
Really?
Because these places are kind of hollowed, right? This work is again another kind of dialogic piece that deals with our notions of immigration. So what the artist did is she asked participants sort of a set group of questions that were also assigned kind of a color code or a design code that resulted in these circular forms, and then they would be able to take a memento of that, a button with them, but then the data was kept to produce this mural that was then laid on this soldiers' memorial to talk about our notions of immigration. And the reason I call it a dialogic work is because of the way it got people talking. I think that there was a lot of space in this work to encourage a conversation about immigration that didn't start with ideology, right? I think one of the kind of amazing elements that public art provides is our ability to reframe difficult subjects. So with immigration, especially being a hot topic now, I think that if we were just to, this room, I could probably guess a lot of the politics, but I think that a piece like this allows us to sidestep that ideology and to start from a new place with a new set of language in order to encourage. This is the sort of visualization of the kind of color code that ultimately made up the form of the mural.
No, this is one that I didn't rate that high, and one that Aaron really was able to sway me on. I mean, after I dug into this a little bit more, peeled back many of the layers of the meaning behind those circles as well, and the process that she used to create these pieces. It was impressive. Now, this piece here is our one selection from Canada. So when we talk about America, hey, all right, there we go. So when we talk about Americans for the arts, that we need to really expand that thinking too and think about America, North America and Central America as well too. But this piece on indigenous ground by indigenous artists really forces us to begin to even rethink our criteria regarding beauty, regarding even sense of place, imagery and iconic, and creating these great icons.
Yeah, Seitu and I talked quite a bit about this work because, again, I think that it is important to make sure that these kind of forms and imagery and spaces get celebrated by the broader community so that they're understood.
Exactly.
Because within that indigenous population, certainly that language may be considered common, it may be understood, it may be legible, but it's not to a lot of other people who might just otherwise not know it exists. And so finding a place to value that and to produce it, I think, is super, super important. And it's also, it necessitates us understanding how that language gets shared and in what form, and the sort of allowances we need to make so that we can sort of let go of our own preconceived notions as curators and administrators and producers to say, no, this is something that this community values producing and that our broader community values having.
Absolutely, and also even raises the question of the composition of our selection panels. We really need to invite folks from that speak these different visual languages to participate, to help educate all of us.
Yeah, and that rightly received applause. And I'll say even as a white man, I am committed to working with communities of color and indigenous populations, but I need those voices out there because I have my own blind spots, I have my own ignorances, and it takes a diverse set of people operating at a high level to help me do my best work, to help us share the best work out there, and to give agency to those voices. I think it's really important.
How y'all doing out there? I mean, okay, good. Good. I always kind of look for eyes closed, and I think that's the time to speed up or to go on. Okay, we're more than halfway through, so a little more. This is a piece that occurred literally blocks away from us. And a big shout out to Mike Hoyt. And this is one where I had to convince Aaron about its power. And primarily because you really can experience this piece just based on the still images that occurred. This happened as a part of the Northern Spark Festival, one of the largest outdoor art festivals that actually is happening tonight. You guys, if it doesn't rain, please come out to the King Center in St. Paul, the Martin Luther King Center in St. Paul, to check out what latest magic artists are throwing out today. But this piece happened right as a part of the discussion of the closure of a set of locks and dams, actually the first lock and dam on the Mississippi River. And it was a collaboration between a poet or poets, spoken word artist, a musician, and a visual artist, highlighting and creating these images on the water inside the lock and dam.
Yeah, when I saw Seitu's vote on this, I knew I'd missed something, and I think that there's a slippage that happens in the photographic reproduction versus the experience of being there, the sort of nuance that happens with multiple producers, that the way that you experience it, how moving it can be, and so I was really appreciative that he was able to see that and share that.
This is one of my favorites as well here, too. This piece recalls the shotgun structures that are all throughout Houston. This piece is called Open House in Houston, Texas. And it is also a comment on development. This open house has this whole set of holes, almost like Swiss cheese, that allow you to look inward and outward. And so you'll see these images on the inside and interior of the house that relate to the site, tell people's individual stories, while letting you look past that into the fast development of Houston, Texas.
Yeah, I mean, this is another piece at $151,000. I thought, my God, they relocated this house. It was actually a home that was in the region that they relocated so that it had some relevance to the other structures that you were looking at here. And the photographs were culled from family members, through community conversations, through thrift stores, to kind of give this multifaceted view of what has been and what is. And I thought, again, this is something that I would probably have revisited many times if I'd had the opportunity. So I just loved the aesthetics of it. This is called The Wall of Now. And this is at the Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago, and this kind of celebrates kind of maybe more unsung hip-hop heroes in Chicago. There's a long legacy of great music coming out of Chicago. Certainly, it's a rich period now with Kanye and Common and Chance, and just an amazing group of artists coming out of that space. But here on the south side of Chicago, a predominantly African-American neighborhood, the community felt like there were stories that hadn't been shared about the legacy of hip-hop and how that legacy could be not only shared but expressed through visual art. at the Hyde Park Art Center. I thought it was a really successful installation. And again, using young audiences, which always kind of has a place in my heart.
Mm-hmm. In history, these pieces, you know, in trying to categorize these pieces, I mean, you all know the challenge there and how with each one of these categories, there are all these pieces that could be a part of something else. I mean, the storytelling, the aesthetics, and we really haven't talked a lot about the aesthetics, too. I mean, even with social practice, maybe even especially with social practice, being placed under a different kind of lens, that we really also need to embrace the aesthetic quality of these pieces. But you know, that's how all these things are blended together in one way or another, all the categories that we created.
And a lot of the work that we're celebrating today does, you know, multiple duties,
Absolutely.
right? One of the reasons these projects rose to the top is because they cross genres, they cross themes, and they're successful in a number of ways.
You know, Philadelphia with its great mural tradition, here again telling a story about immigration and loss. Families belong together in the city of Philadelphia.
Yeah, I think that you know the title says it all, right? Families Belong Together by Ian Pierce. It's a work that is prescient. It's a work that's important right now. But one of the reasons it's important right now is because of history that we know separates
right.
families and how detrimental that can be, and it's happening again. So I think that this mural will stay relevant and will resonate with people for years to come. I think it's an important work.
You know, this piece called The Neighborhood Is Portraits of Culleton Park Neighbors. So it's a set of portraits set inside the window spaces of this building in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And one of the things that blew me away was looking at that budget there. And while I mentioned artists making magic, we shouldn't depend upon artists making that magic, and actually try and figure out ways to increase the resources for projects like this in particular.
And that lift was all the budget.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
right. Just to rent that lift.
You know, I hear, you know, again, I'm sure all of us live in spaces that have, you know, blight or have underutilized buildings, and a lot of times I get asked to do work like this, and again, I'm like, I don't know that it's going to have the impact that you think it will. But this work, as Seitu said, considering that budget, does so much, and I think it does a lot to honor the people in that neighborhood.
Right.
I think it does more than this work normally would. I think they really took a lot of time to make it work in this space, and I applaud the effort and the outcome. This is a before piece, but the Wright Lakes Park mural is another example of kind of young audiences being part of the production, and actually participating in the content and making of the mural, the composition of the mural, and we're involved at kind of all stages, and yet it doesn't look like a sloppy mess, and it doesn't look like paint by numbers. I think that it really is an impressive work. And you know, when I read some things about this piece, and there's actually some great videos online about it, you know, the people depicted here are the people who helped paint it. They're the people in the neighborhood, and it almost like this image in particular. They interviewed one of the little girls on the monkey bars, and you know, she's like, I'm in a mural, and I thought about, like, it makes me want to cry, like thinking about like my son in a mural, like, and how meaningful that is to that family and to those neighbors, and how it can inspire us all to commit to these kinds of spaces and really elevate what is otherwise, you know, a space that would have gone just unnoticed entirely.
And based here in Minnesota, Greta McLean has really been able to formalize that process and create this work, excuse me, that ends up displaying her own visual language.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that it allows her signature to stay on the work, and
Right.
yet still everybody feels like because they did participate in the making of it. That's a very difficult thing to do, and I thought it was done really well there.
Again, storytelling, social practice. Before Christina had her baby, we had a long conversation, the three of us, about this work here. About it, whether or not this is public art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my first note when I was initially looking at all of the proposals, I made a little note next to this, and I said, "It's amazing if it's public art." And I had to kind of really think about what that meant, because this work, these forms, these vessels, are really precious little creations, impeccably made, that talk about really tough aspects of our current conditions.
Pieces made for vitrines.
Yeah, and I mean, it could show in a white cube gallery and be just as moving. And artwork is rarely autonomous like that. And so I just felt like, presenting this in a public space would be really kind of moving. But also we got really inspired by the way in which this work was created, by the communities that came together, that included incarcerated individuals, to help produce this work and again give voice to otherwise voiceless individuals in our society.
You know what this artist did here is tell the story of inmates at a California prison, a California women's prison called Camp 13, where these women are trained to help control fires in Santa Monica. And so she's telling the story of these women firefighters that's based in these 10 small valises. The tools there.
It's amazing work.
It is.
This piece called Sanctuary, which I won't name off all the artists. I think there's like 36 artists from maybe 20 some odd countries that were invited to produce these floor pieces, these rugs, these like kneeling rugs, prayer rugs, to reflect on, again, immigration, globalization, shared cultures, and the value of that. And, as it is installed here, I just imagine how moving, this work would be. I did not see it in person. I really wish I had, because it's something that, to me, I think would have taken my breath away. I think there would have been a hush in the room that would have been transformative.
Y'all may or may not know this, but there, right now, as we speak, a conference on art and religion, another pre-conference, that's happening at Bethel College. And looking at this piece here, Sanctuary, it really is something that's reflective of this religiosity, this creating this spiritual space, this sacred space.
Well, and those of us who work closely with artists, we know that so often the language we use, it becomes kind of imbued with the religious and with the spiritual. And so seeing a place like this to sort of talk about the proximity of these cultures, the proximity of the people making them, and the value of being able to move in between that space with safety and freedom, I think is really valuable.
And we should probably pick it up a little bit. We've got like a few more, and the time now is running out here. We're almost there, guys.
Almost there. Well, this incorporates, this work incorporates construction netting, kind of that ugly orange, the orange kind of woven fabric that is around buildings to keep mortar or bricks from falling, and sort of unsightly, high visibility for a good reason, but maybe not the best thing that you'd want to look at, and used kind of public participation to talk about the way in which that could be revisioned as an immersive space, to talk about how we recycle, how we reuse not just material but buildings and space, and the value of sort of common creation, as you see here. Oh God, we're going to talk about dialogue now. Okay, so slow it down, he says. So building better tables. I'm gonna defer here to Seitu, but I will say that I voted for this piece. Seitu abstained because he's part of it. But I felt very strongly about this work. I've followed Seitu's production for some time now, and know the capacity for it to change hearts and minds. So I'll let Seitu.
And here the dialogue was about food access, and food justice. Curator Nicole Carruth, commissioned by the city of Nashville to create this outdoor exhibition with artists from a wide range of perspectives that created these pieces in dialogue with the communities that they were presented in. And this piece, can you talk more about this piece?
Yeah, so the Out of Thin Air piece is an interesting kind of performative, again, dialogic piece where the artist in the slides you're seeing right here actually led a group of people, blindfolded them through an audio work that had kind of multiple locations. And, it ostensibly was to resensitize these visitors to their landscape, to get them to hear the wind, the movement of air. So you'd hear like kind of rustling of leaves, or sort of the hush of wind in your space, as a way to say the air is moving all around you, and to talk about the sort of equity around having clean air. So it was sort of a springboard for the artist to talk about that aspect. It's hard to, one of the themes to say, oh my God, this thing crushed, but impeccable craft is something that, we really kind of wanted to reward. When artists do it well and they do it right, we want to reward them.
These pieces that are, maybe one of the categories should have been mind-blowing.
Oh man, yeah, and I use the word linger with Firle Baez's work here because I want this to be my. I want to stop at this station every day. Like I thought this was just an astonishing work. Firle has an ever-expanding practice, a studio practice, but is beginning to make more and more public works. Has a piece up on the High Line right now as well, and I was thrilled to see. Oh my God, look at that thing! Like I was thrilled to see her studio work be translated into a mosaic here, a long-lasting work that will, I think, surprise and delight people for years to come. It's just a shockingly good piece. And we talked about the ways in which that may have had, those impeccable craft objects may have had merely an architectural intervention as in addition to the way they make you want to linger and stay with the space. So this piece, Wild Wonderland, was one where I just kept on going like, oh my God, like I want to see all the details of this.
Exactly. This is one of the ones you want to get close up to as well as look at from a distance.
Yeah, the detail in this work and the way that it's transformative is really amazing. And listen, the budget reflects it on the last two mosaic pieces. It costs a lot more to make a mosaic than it does a mural. These kind of elements cost a lot more than paint, but they will also last a lot longer. These things stand to be generational works and stand to be celebrated and visited by people to come. The same is true of this work. Again, I just think that the craft involved, the way that space is being altered, it's just incredible. I want these to be the spaces that I visit.
Same artist, two different projects.
And it makes me angry about the other elevator lobbies that I've had to suffer through. we should all have elevators like this. Like it's amazing. It's astonishing work. And again, you know, the Scrivito style mosaic here, produced by an artist of color. I think, you know, again, we were looking at this thing going, man, this is not easy work, and this is the kind of work that really changes the space forever. And when you look at the budget on this project,
Right. I mean, compare this budget to the last budget that we saw. Is that equitable?
it's not. And the artist, you know, produced something really, really outstanding.
Something masterful.
Masterful. And then continuing on with our storytelling thread, you know, there's this aspect of history, but how does that history land, right? How do you, is it on a plaque and then you walk away, right? Or is it integrated into the work? So this work, Mantle, was one that dealt with the indigenous population there in Virginia, and the sort of spiral form pulls you in. It demands time. It demands that you travel. It asks you to stay and sit and read and contemplate and be in an environment that it's redefining to create an awareness about that history. And I really loved this work. Yeah, I love the way that it pulls you in and that it necessitates you coming back. You have to be part of this piece in order to experience it. And then, you know, again, kind of mashing all of these themes together, the ways in which projects become successful is because they sometimes are compelling in any number of ways. So this next project, another MTA project, called Beacons, to me was great because, again, it's another example of a work that's not a memorialization, right? You have Sonia Sotomayor there, but you'll also have Baldwin. And I mean, I love the way in which this kind of tells a story that shows that it's an ongoing story. Again, celebrating images of people of color, and I just, again, I want to get off at this station and check it out. It's amazing.
Just shot of Rico, who I know is in town for the Art and Religion conference that's happening on the other side of town.
Again, and then encouraging.
I'm sorry, I went too fast there.
No, well, just encourage. The way that differed was meditation, and maybe you can take this piece because you and I talked a lot about it.
Yeah, now this piece here, and we need to give a big shout out to the artist who was in the room here. Cliff Garton is back there. So. That was an applause without even really seeing the work yet here, but the work is fantastic. This is another piece that draws you in, another piece that's impeccable in terms of its craft. These machining stone so that it almost becomes fluid. And this really tells the story, too, of the struggle of what brought Martin Luther King to Memphis, where he was assassinated. But the I Am a Man icon that you see all over, throughout history books, is the central piece of this plaza. And when you look beyond that, are the names over here are texts and words from Martin Luther King, but beyond that, behind that, are the names of all the sanitation workers that were a part of the strike. Mm-hmm.
Kind of, again, doing multiple duty here. The next work by Kerry James Marshall is something that I loved right away, and then I thought, oh God, do I love this just because I love Kerry James Marshall? Growing up, or spending time in Chicago, Marshall really holds court there, and he's an important person, and I've had the luxury of speaking with him on a number of occasions. I did not know that this work had been produced, and so what you have here is the sort of form of these two African talking drums that are, sort of set upon each other in a kind of almost precarious way, but also in a stable way. You have this sort of classic blackness that Kerry James Marshall uses in all of his production as the sort of form of the work, but then when light is reflected off it becomes this incredible kind of mixture of gold and all kinds of colors. And it's an astonishing work that I know took him years and years to produce.
Right.
And the location is not an accident either. It's in a location that celebrates one of the oldest bar associations dedicated to working with clients of color and people of color. And so it's classic Kerry James Marshall, but in a way that I'd never seen him produce. And so I was thrilled to see this work executed.
Another big shout out to all you folks here from Des Moines. I know there's a contingent here from Des Moines.
Oh, see, we did well. This is the last work.
Yeah. Well, one more after this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
No, this is
I think this is the last one.
Yeah.
So chorus by Ann Hamilton here. This is something that Seitu and I talked a lot about too, because it's so big and it's so, like, the idea is big, the physicality is big, and I was like, I don't know, can you get all of it? Because it incorporates numerous texts that deal with human rights throughout time, and I was like, I don't know that you can digest all of this. And then I started talking to Seitu about it, and I was like, I think that's kind of the point. You're supposed to take time with this work and really see how certain documents that we hold high are maybe even flawed documents about how they deal with human rights, and how future documents used elements of what we've produced as springboards to create even greater documents that celebrate and protect human rights. And I thought, like, my God, this is the kind of work that you would take, that you would sort of read and digest over time, and it would be meaningful for ever. I mean, I don't know. It was a really, really moving piece. And again, Ann Hamilton, just an impeccable artist, impeccable work. The craft here is astonishing. So it deserves the award.
And here we come to an end. Once again, I thank you all for not falling asleep. And
We made it.
And so we'll see you. We're just a little bit past our time, so we'll see you again next year.
We will. Thank you so much.
Take care, man. You did it.
You did it. That was great. Yeah. Well, I'm going to come back when I'm helping people. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Why?
All right. Thank you again to our fantastic jurors. Everybody who's been through this before knows I don't like long goodbyes, but I do have a few people we want to finish thanking and give you guys a few pieces of information before you head out. So give me 1 second. So I want to do a quick shout out to our exhibitors who were here since yesterday. Thank you all again and being fantastic and having lovely conversations with our attendees. Thank you. Thank you again to our sponsor last night for the fantastic food and alcohol and everything else. I shouldn't say that, but here we are. For helping us put together a fantastic 5x5. So thank you to Ben, thank you to Arts at MSP and the Airport Foundation. And congratulations again to Roberto Bedoya, Cultural Affairs Manager, City of Oakland, and our 2019 PAN Leadership Awardee. So congratulations again to Roberto. And if you're not part of it yet and you want to continue conversation with your colleagues across the country, join our membership table and learn how to become part of the Public Art Network. It's a network of over 400 of your colleagues and your ability to connect with each other whenever you need it to help you either bounce around ideas or have conversations around issues and challenges that you're facing within your work. So join us for that. It's the only professional network that focuses particularly on public art needs and interests. Many of the resources you've heard about today are also available through the Public Art Resource Center. This was an online resource that was developed and launched last year. So we're very excited to keep this updated and for you guys to use it as a resource throughout your work. And a few quick goodbyes. I'm going to invite Mary to come up to say thank you for being here.
Wow, right? Wow, I mean, don't you have goosebumps? I have goosebumps. That was, wow. You know, the year in review, it is this really incredible thing every year. It reminds me that people have been using the word ecosystem a lot the last couple days, and it reminds me that I am just an organism in just a really powerful and beautiful ecosystem that is this amazing story assembled by artists and the people they care about in our communities. And wow, thank you, you guys. Wow. One other thing that has really struck me, I've been doing art stuff for a long time. I've been a member of Americans for the Arts since 1987, which is the same year I met Seitu. Yesterday I was also, it's this enormous story, like we're part of this enormous story. We just saw 1 year of it, right? Yesterday I was reminded about how the arc of these stories that we are a part of are also generational. I mean, Jeremiah Ellison recognized Seitu as his mentor, right? And I mean, and now he's part of the next generation of artists working in our community. I had the chance to see Ralph Remington yesterday. He was in part of the 38th in Chicago tour. He started a pretty radical theater as part of a settlement house on Chicago Avenue in the early 90s. A theater that had the courage to talk about race. And we were in that theater yesterday, and that theater is as powerful as it was when Ralph was there, and he's moved on to Tempe where he's doing amazing things, and he's had many careers since then. And we were listening to Mike Hoyt talk, and to see how that theater started something that has become so much more than a theater, where the artistic directors of that theater had to, during hard budget times, think about how the arts needed to be integrated into the basic work of the settlement house, in the daycare center, in the clinic, and how to help just to keep the place going, how to combine the arts with the social services in that space, and how that has become a new, powerful story of art and the impact it has on communities, and artists are reading poetry in the clinic reception room. So cool. And how artists are getting grants to do projects on their block, and how they're measuring the impact of their work by looking at the relationships with artists and that they have built with each other, and how many connections each artist has with other artists. And so I was just, we are just part of this really cool thing. It's just so cool. And so what I hope I'm going to take away from this, and what I hope some of you will hold me accountable to, is, I know as a public art administrator, we get caught up in so many details. Seitu and I were just talking about how we've spent the last 2 months getting an insurance form, taking care of You know, we have footing disasters. We create an engagement opportunity sometimes and no one comes. We have to manage these horrible government contracts. And we get caught up in that. And so I just hope that what I'm going to take away from this great 2 days is remembering that I am part of that bigger story, the bigger story of all the beautiful work we saw this morning and the generational work that is happening across the United States. So thank you so much for coming to Minneapolis and being part of this. If you're here tonight, please go to Northern Spark. And like these guys said, see you again next year.
You will soon be released, but not until you get to see me again. I wanted to thank everyone for coming, and especially to acknowledge the, what do we call it? The Public Art Network Council. One of the most important things we do is talk about year in review and the right juror mix and how we get 2 or 3 people to talk about public art in a way that sort of works for everyone. I really want to shout out to everyone that submitted a project because we're all doing great work. We impact communities, we change lives. We're all here because art speaks to us in one way or another. I also want to acknowledge the fact that there are artists and administrators and architects and engineers and fabricators that interpret the work. It's all part of the magic that we don't quantify, but we couldn't live without. So the council especially, Ruri Yampolsky has been vice chair for 2 years, laughing at my jokes sometimes. Ben Owen, who's changed his name back from Stone, sorry about that yesterday. Sue Lamb, Chris Guerra, Lucas Cowan, you're not Jewish, Michael Chavez, Claire Haggerty, Tracy Hall, Jim Hirschfield, who wasn't with us today, he apologized, Mandy Vink, Carrie Gerasi, Kip Kobayashi, I should have memorized this, Amina Cooper, Julia Mooney-Moore, John Hayworth. I didn't forget anyone. Thank you all to the council, to all of you for being here. See you in Washington in a year and a time that will find us optimistic, let's hope. Thank you all for coming.
And yes, please do join us next year. We'll be in Washington, D.C. from the 26th to the 28th. Thank you all so much. I hope you had a fantastic time. I know I did. I greatly appreciate all of our partners, all the fantastic work that was done for months in advance on the ground to make this work happen, not only for our speakers in the morning from yesterday, but also the tours that were developed, which was all done by our local collaborators, our fantastic jurors who did months of work reviewing all those applications. And thank you all for coming. I know you all are so busy, and I hope you really did enjoy the past day and a half together with your colleagues and being able to make really great connections, share knowledge, and really network and better understand where you fit within the larger public art ecosystem of the U.S. and the larger continent. So thank you all again. Have safe travels for those who are leaving, and I look forward to seeing more than half of you as you stay for the rest of the convention. So thank you.